Hello and welcome to the Fertility Foundations podcast, where we go into detail about how to prepare the foundations for a healthy pregnancy. We dive deep into the underlying root causes for fertility issues and natural solutions. I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not broken. I hope that by sharing these episodes, this will help you move from feeling overwhelmed and lost to feeling hopeful and empowered to take charge of your own path to parenthood, because there are actually lots of things that you can do to help rewrite your own story. I'm Sandra Greenbank, nutritional therapist, functional medicine practitioner, coach and educator, specializing in fertility, pregnancy and postpartum health. I'm also the founder of the Fertility Nutrition Center, where you can find fully trained experts in nutrition, lifestyle and functional approaches to a healthy fertility and pregnancy. You can find out more information over at www.fertilitynutritioncenter.org and also book a free strategy call with one of our experts on that website. Today, I'm speaking to Milena Mastroianni all about blood testing and analysis and which tests are important as part of a fertility workup. Milena always knew she wanted to support women and couples in the space of fertility, as nutrition and in-depth testing were a game changer for her own fertility and parenthood journey. Not only is she a passionate advocate of the incredible power of real food to transform our health and fertility, but she's proud to be her clients' go-to support when fertility feels like a puzzle. Milena enjoys supporting those who are trying to conceive through proactively optimizing the whole couple's nutrition and lifestyle. Using the functional medicine tools of advanced testing, her ultimate goal is to unveil the root causes of fertility issues or hormonal imbalances, and together build a strong foundation for conception and a healthy pregnancy. She's passionate about guiding her clients with personalised recommendations so that they can feel fully supported and more empowered than they've ever been, in the knowledge that every action they take and every mouthful can bring them closer to their family dreams. Before we get into the interview, I wanted to mention our podcast sponsors, Neovos. They're a UK lab that provide at-home health tests and cutting-edge analysis. I personally like the vitamin D and omega-3 tests, which are absolutely crucial to get right for anyone trying for a baby. Knowledge is power, and in my opinion, you need to always check, not guess, your levels of omega-3 and vitamin D so that you can supplement correctly if you need it. I've found the Neovos test really easy to use and affordable too. The Neovos team have kindly offered our listeners a 10% discount on their website using the code FERTILITY at the checkout. Their website is simply www.neovos.com. All of these details are also in the show notes for you. Now let's get into today's interview with Milena. So, hi Milena, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Sandra, thank you for having me.
Just for those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about how you got into nutritional therapy and why you decided to work in fertility nutrition specifically?
Yeah, sure. So I always think that I kind of subconsciously and consciously prepared for my fertility journey when we started to kind of think about conceiving way later in my life. Like I was way past the age of 35, and I always feel that kind of proactive approach to trying to conceive in a fertility journey really helped us. Kind of then with the boys we had later, and I decided to specialize in fertility because I thought, like, as I was going through that, a lot of information was so hard to get, and there was so much confusing advice, whether following one diet or another diet. And I had actually basically gone into studying nutrition to find out more about the body in general and health, and then obviously that helped me a lot along my fertility journey as well. So yeah, I definitely felt that the nutrition really, really helped from my point of view. And then all the other tools that you learn along the way of having a nutrition practice, like testing, which we will talk about a little bit today as well.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important for the health of the family as well, and I remember when we were at ION, or when I was there were a lot of people actually who were struggling with the fertility at the time, and loads of them got pregnant in their 40s, which was, people were so surprised, and the lecturers were like, why are you surprised? We told you before you said, because they actually warned us to say, your fertility is going to increase. Of course. And I remember just thinking, this is so amazing. Like there's something in this.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely was a pattern on my cohort as well. And and a few kind of the last years were kind of delayed a little bit because of having children, right? So
it's so funny. But anyway, we're going to talk about blood testing today, and this is something that I think everyone has had a blood test in their life, and they just think that the test you get from your doctor is like the test you need, but actually there's so much more to blood testing, and it's a really technical area as well. And so I think we're going to focus sort of more on sort of the general, whoever's listening now and thinking, have I had the test that I need to have, and what should I be thinking about? So, but I wanted to start by asking you about the standard reference ranges that we sort of, you're kind of looking at your blood test results, and then it says, this is the reference range, and you're within that, so therefore everything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you got to say about that?
Yeah, no, we hear this a lot, don't we, in practice? When clients come to us and they may have done some blood testing before, and they said no, but everything was normal, everything was fine. So there's a lot to just unpack there in terms of I mean, first of all, the fact that obviously everyone understands blood testing anyway, so it's important that we start with some blood testing anyway, because obviously it's the most recognized type of testing with the worldwide as well, and GPs and doctors will all recognize that. And then the other thing is obviously is that reference, all those markers have been studied for a very long time, so there's a lot of research on them. But the reference standard ranges that we see, they are based on statistics mostly, and it's based on wide populations, and often they do not necessarily kind of match with kind of good health or optimal kind of physiological function, basically. So then the kind of the out of range kind of markers are based on kind of overt symptoms, but not necessarily before you kind of start feeling unwell and you go to say a doctor and say I'm not feeling great kind of thing, and then everything comes back normal, but actually there has something has started. It's like a process has started in the background to kind of make unbalance things. So I
suppose what they would have done is say take 100 people, and they might have just stopped them in the street and said, "Do you feel well?" And they go, "Yeah, I feel well." And then immediately you're thinking, but how many of us are truly, truly well, like really well? So then you're starting with a group of people, and they're saying, well, all these people feel good, and we don't know that they've got any particular disease, and they don't have. And then so the range that they get is sort of that's deemed to be normal. So that's one way of looking at it. Each marker on their own, and you're looking at it's a very simplified way in looking at how reference ranges come about, but it's kind of pretty much it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's just they're very wide, as you say, and it's a wide range of population, as well as not overt symptoms kind of being detected yet, and then that's when we're using that kind of big curve for the reference range. And there's a lot of statistics as well in them that makes those reference ranges. They can also change from lab to lab sometimes, or from country to country, I find as well. So it's quite interesting how it kind of being tighter with those reference ranges is actually more important for us in terms of looking at optimal health.
And actually, it can take a really long time for data to be incorporated into the NICE guidelines, into WHO guidelines. And then once that has changed, once those guidelines change, each hospital then has to change their guidelines. And I remember during pregnancy, there were a couple of test results that I had that were out of range. And I looked up the WHO guidelines and they were different from my hospital because they had been updated, and they said, well, we don't go, this is our policy. We haven't updated ours yet. So therefore you're outside of the range. Whereas actually so this is where it becomes really kind of, you have to sort of know where to look and what to look at as well.
Yeah.
And I think also that some ranges are based on the male population and they are applied to women, but we are not small men. We are not men.
Indeed. Yes. Yeah, as I said, like it's kind of a wider generalization of health, right, from those reference ranges. And also I think also what I find is that some slightly abnormal results, if they're not like overly abnormal, then sometimes also not looked at properly. They're considered just borderline ignored. And it's okay. And then what we want to know is why they're borderline, why they are in that kind of state, what's pushing that trend.
And is it getting worse?
Yes. Yeah.
Or is it changing? Yeah. So with that in mind, then, what do you think? I mean, how do you approach? Say someone's been to the GP and they've said, often what I find is people come to me and they say, I've been to the GP, I've told everything's fine. And then you go, have you got a copy of results? No, I've not seen them.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. So yeah, first of all, definitely getting your records, your data, from a GP as much as possible. And then the markers, when we look at those results, then we have another set of markers. We have a set of optimal markers that we look at, and we kind of like, however we want to do it, but actually we can use spreadsheets or whatever to kind of plug those values in, and we can start seeing from the normal reference range which ones are actually really, really normal or optimal, or which ones are actually slightly out of range from an optimal point of view, so that we can call them suboptimal, or from that point of view, yes, or under optimal. Yeah. So that's where then it's also important to look at then from an optimal kind of optimal reference ranges point of view, what are the different markers that are popping up as suboptimal, and what kind of patterns we want to recognize with them. Yeah, so that's the second thing, isn't it? So you're looking at each marker individually, but then also you can look at the trend. The trends, and say your iron's off and your thyroid results are a little bit borderline normal, and you're thinking, we need to iron is needed for thyroid, it's for thyroid hormone conversion, so that there is definitely like a connection there. And then iron is definitely one of the ones that we see a lot where it's not in the optimal range, is if it's even like towards the start of the reference range, when it's actually already pretty low, it's considered normal, and that is definitely one of the ones that we want to look at, we want to definitely address, because we know it's implicated in so many different things. But also, like from a metabolic point of view, you start seeing things being off a little bit from a liver point of view or cholesterol point of view. We know that we know there is a trend there, and we can talk about this as well. But definitely start looking at where the suboptimal values is super crucial and important. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that actually you can probably do yourself if you get a full blood count, which is like the standard test that the GP would run, and they would look at iron or ferritin, folate, B12, and if you see across the board they are low, then you're thinking, why am I not absorbing
these nutrients. You know, if
That's
your
right.
diet is, if you believe you have a good diet, maybe you're even taking supplements, those values shouldn't be low. And so, you know, is there an absorption issue? Is it potentially celiac? And this is something that I always want to keep an eye out for, because for some people, the only symptom of celiac disease is infertility.
Yeah, indeed.
And one clue could be that your nutrients are quite low on your blood tests. And it's unexplained. If you have a terrible diet, we wouldn't expect you to have good values as nutrients anyway. But
absolutely. I mean, there's so many kind of markers that we ideally want to have, right, to have a fuller picture, and then the kind of celiac screen is definitely one of them in the list of all the markers that we try to look at from a fertility point of view, at least if it hasn't been done before, for sure. And then
it's very unlikely that you'll get it done unless you've got significant gut issues, and even then it's very rarely checked, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I find that in practice, if you do have a justification for it, then and that's why also it obviously helps to work with a practitioner, that, you know, if you can write a letter and justify why you do want to have a particular blood test done, then I find that often it's a yes and it works. And so,
that's it. And actually you can really help advocate then for that test to be done on the NHS to save you a little bit of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about pattern recognition then, and what else are you looking for specifically when it comes to fertility? So we talked about nutrient absorption.
Yeah. So I mean, the nice thing is to first of all start from some specific kind of panels, or from a kind of blood markers point of view. So obviously start from a really lovely full blood count, because that already can give us a lot of information. So some of the patterns that you would get from a full blood count, for example, are whether you may be low in iron, which is you then want to check in your iron markers, whether you may be low in folate already, B12. If you look very specifically, we can also look at things like B6 as well. Some markers can give us an indication whether, you know, and sometimes we can't test B6. So it's a nice to kind of get a gist of what may be going on. So those markers are really important for, like, you know, folate, B12, they're very important for methylation. And this process of methylation happens all the time in our body, but it's super important when it comes to fertility, because it's at the foundation of reproduction of cells and repairing of cells. So it's super important from, you know, sperm health to, you know, to egg quality, and as well as kind of reproduction and kind of mitochondria and everything else. So that's already like a positive thing. Then in the full blood count, you also get some information about white blood cells. And again, you know, this is where sometimes little slightly abnormal results come up, and they're not necessarily looked at because there's no symptoms or anything like that. And that's where, again, we potentially want to look at what's happening with iron, because we know that kind of bacteria, viruses, parasites use kind of iron. So if there is some kind of change in the white blood cells, then potentially there's some change also in the iron markers as well. And that can give us an indication of what else may be going on, what else do we need to go and look out for. From an immunity point of view, or infection point of view, which ultimately can cause kind of inflammation. And then there are, you know, the profiles that I always call kind of metabolic, that, you know, they are to do with, like, for example, liver, or blood glucose, or HbA1c, for example, or cholesterol. They can give us an indication about what's going on in terms of your metabolic health, and you know, insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, whether there is already a trend there going around. There's also some information about bile flow you can get from some liver markers, which is like GGT, for example, which is quite, you know, it's quite good to have in the whole picture. and which can then impact cholesterol as well. And what else? Obviously, like, other important, I like to also look at minerals when we can. We've got things like sodium, potassium, calcium. Obviously, hydration is super important, and we know that's super important for fertility. Also, like in terms of like a cervical mucus, and from that point of view as well. But also, I mean, for energy and also for cellular health, we know that the sodium potassium kind of pump around our cell membrane is quite important for getting nutrients in, right? So that's another one that I also really like looking at as well.
And you've got your hormones as well.
The hormones,
and with all of these that we're talking about, these are kind of generally done via the GP, unless they're particularly unhelpful. But usually you can get these.
Yeah, I mean, from hormones, we can start from the thyroid. Obviously, you get like a limited amount of information from the GP. But the kind of like standard kind of female hormones or male hormones can also be tested with GP as well. Yes. And ideally, that's the other thing I find. Ideally, you want to be able to do them on the right days, on the days, day 3 for certain hormones, and for progesterone, which is kind of the hormones of ovulation that we want to kind of look at in terms of how strong an ovulation we may have had. That is normally done 7 days post ovulation, and that could be considered day 21 for some people, but it could be considered day 23, 24 for other people. So that's another kind of important nuance to keep in mind when it comes to hormone testing. And again, yes, looking at them from a kind of optimal reference range as well is pretty important.
And the range can be so wide specifically for the hormones, can't they, as well? And I think that it's important to say that it's not just women who need all of these tests, it's men as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And making sure that they have a hormone panel too, looking at testosterone, SHBG, prolactin, LH, FSH, estrogen. I mean, both
and
partners
thyroid
really
too,
could have, and thyroid, of course, So, but it might be a little bit trickier for the male partner to get this, but they should, I think now in this day and age, should get a semen analysis and a blood test from the GP.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to write it in my letter and obviously give a reason for it. And let's say like 60-80% out of the times I send letters, they say yes. We know, so as you say, it's about the guidelines, right, and knowing how to play around them as well. We know that, for example, GPs won't test again if the markers were not out of range the last year. So it's about knowing what was tested before. If a semen analysis never done before, there's no reason why the GP may not be able to do it if HEF has not been done before, and it's obviously for a good reason. So it's always important to know when it's possible and when we can ask, and when when it's within the guidelines, there's kind of a lower risk for to get a no, basically, from requesting tests.
One of the ones that I always think people should test, and that just never gets done by the GP, because the GP guidelines are that it's assume that it's low, so therefore we don't test, and it's vitamin D. We assume that the entire population is low, and therefore we don't test. But I just think it's so important to test 100%. To know your levels so that you know how much to take.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, yes, supplementing vitamin D. Where do you go from there? Like, you could be supplementing maintenance dose, but if you're low, that maintenance dose is not going to get you anywhere. Or you could be over supplementing, hopefully not, but that's also a bit dangerous. So it's really important to know what your actual number is on those markers to be able to know how much you do need to supplement.
Yeah.
And the same, it's the same for folate and B12. How many times do we see that being either on the floor or being too high, potentially from over supplementing? that we need to then want to readjust, because we know that obviously, as we said, they're implicated in methylation, and you don't want to potentially cause over methylation, right? And that everything needs to be kind of on a Goldilocks kind of range. We like it to be like that, right? Because it's never too much or too little. It's still
and
good,
actually
right?
that's another point, isn't it? That, you know, just because it's high on a blood test, it doesn't actually mean that you've just absorbed loads really well. Actually, it can mean that, you know, depending on what's tested, for example, B12, if it's testing what's in the red blood cell or what's in the serum, you know, and it's not even often clear on the test result what's been tested, but, you know, you might have really high B12 and you think, oh, this is good, you know, but actually if it's high in the serum, it might mean that it's not been taken into the cell properly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so again, you need to know what you're looking at.
Yeah, and this is where kind of then the kind of following steps in terms of research and looking into what else may be going on. You know, it could be a gut issue, it could be like a cellular membrane health issue that we need to look into. There are often patterns that you can start looking at from the blood tests anyway. And that's why it's so important to have that starting point of blood testing, because then you know which direction to go afterwards. Better, or which other areas to prioritize as well.
And so, say I've had a blood test by the GP and I've been told that everything's fine, but I'm feeling a bit like maybe deep down I don't feel like I am fine. What should I do?
Well, that's when the optimal reference ranges come in, right? That's when re-looking at those tests from an optimal range point of view, it's a nice first step to do, because it would allow to just then start looking at those patterns, and if there is something slightly off, in which area that may be. We can see that often with thyroid testing, can we? Like when, unfortunately, then we can only have maybe one or two markers with the NHS or with the GP, but then those two markers don't necessarily give us a full picture of what may be going on in terms of like thyroid hormones, whether they're actually being converted into the active hormone T3, which is not tested often. What else may be going on as well from a thyroid health or inflammation point of view, right? So first of all, looking at those kind of markers again from a optimal level, and then also seeing what else hasn't been tested, what's missing that we could obtain potentially somewhere else that can give us further clues as to what may be going on.
Yeah, so this is where the private testing comes in. Obviously, we have access to lots of different labs, depending on what we need to look at. But yeah, for sure, the thyroid, you know, establishing whether there's an autoimmune component, which, you know, just doesn't, you know,
regardless, we want to do anyway, don't we? Because I mean, sometimes we don't see the changes in some of those thyroid markers until later, right? Then until after the autoimmune side of things has kicked in. So it's, from a fertility point of view, definitely want to make sure that that's ruled out, because we know that has got an impact on many things, including implantation. So in, you know, the reactivity of your immune system anyway, and obviously thyroid kind of integrity as well. So so there are various we're kind of lucky in a way in the UK, I guess. There's so many labs that we can go to for private testing. We tend to work mostly like, you know, with labs that can be either, you know, available to the public, or also labs that, you know, they work with practitioners only. I quite like those to start with as well, because sometimes we can also kind of customize the panels, or we can, you know, we know which areas to look into a little bit more. But there's so many other kind of labs that I don't do any kind of publicity here, but yeah, there's so many labs, that the private labs that anyone can kind of buy a nice full blood panel from and have that analyzed, ideally by a practitioner looking at these optimal reference ranges.
For
but
sure.
also, yes, kind of at least starting to do the work there of looking, because that's what I also find. It's often, and maybe when you mention the male side of things, maybe they have never had a blood test before,
they
or
don't
it's
get
been like
one,
ages.
do they?
So it's good to be starting somewhere, definitely. And there's so many private options now that are available to everyone.
So I think privately, what we'd always try to do is the vitamin D. If we can't get that done, a full therapy panel, which you simply can't, you simply can't get it from your GP, and usually it's not done by any fertility clinics either. Full iron panel. I think iron is so complicated, complex.
Absolutely,
because it doesn't just come down to the ferritin; it's about the carrier mechanism,
the transferrin,
and it's about the size of the red blood cells and whether actually they're too big to be carrying nutrients through to the placenta, which is teeny tiny capillaries, for example. And there's so many things that can be impacted.
And we know also, ferritin as a marker is, it can be such a crucial, it's so important, but it equally can give us so much information about what else may be going on, because we know then ferritin is elevated. It's not because you've been having necessarily a lot of red meat, or because you're in a lot of iron sources. Ferritin is elevated sometimes when there is inflammation in the body, and the body's kind of storing, retaining iron so that it doesn't go into circulation again. And that's similar to what we were saying before, when there's some kind of immune activation and what else may be going on. So a full kind of iron panel, looking at all of them together, ferritin with the serum iron, what else is going on, and the transfer and everything else, is really quite important to give us real clues as to whether there is real deficiency sometimes, or functional deficiency, where iron is potentially not getting into the cells for a particular reason.
So the strategy isn't then to put more iron in, is to actually fix what's going on, whether it's inflammation or infection or something else. But also, I think iron is one of those that you definitely don't want to be taking if you don't need it, because it can be inflammatory and quite damaging. Certainly for a man, we see hemochromatosis quite a lot as well, where they actually have an iron overload, and which is a genetic
or there is at least a question mark, and then we need to obviously want to rule that out in GP and check, definitely. And you can't get that just from simply one full blood count test, right? You need to have that extra information about what's going on, which happens with fertility, happens with pregnancy as well. I see quite a lot. If only one panel, one set of tests are done, like the full blood count, and hemoglobin is going down, and often iron is dispensed, and it's not necessarily the right option at that particular time if we don't know for sure.
And let's talk about the iron that you get prescribed.
No, let's not talk about that.
There are better options for sure, and at very low cost, really. So there's no reason why you should have to put up with the prescribed iron that you get.
And the symptoms and the side effects, right?
It's just poorly absorbed. It's constipating.
I find that some clients just can't get along with it as well, from a nausea point of view, just in general, it upsets their stomach. So it's a quite interesting one. But then again, also again, looking at everything else in the blood panels, what else may be going on? If we have more information about, even like electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, or magnesium as well. We know we know all those kind of and even some liver markers, for example, give us some information about zinc. And we know that all of those minerals kind of work together for iron metabolism, iron absorption. And so it's important to have a fuller picture when having like as many markers as possible to kind of, before even supplementing just with iron, and having a clue what else may be going on from a mineral point of view, mineral absorption point of view.
Yeah, mineral panel is great to have, isn't it? But it does tend to come with depending on what ones you try, you have to get the centrifuge sample, and then it becomes more and more complicated. But yeah, definitely something that I think it's important to, instead of just going out and ordering all of these, I'm not even sure you could get all of the sort of more complex tests on your own, but rather than spending the money, I think it's worth asking somebody like yourself, what are the important tests for me to focus on? And then so because you can go out and buy so many tests, can't you? And actually they might not be necessary for you either.
Yeah, it all depends what has been done before, whether it was done recently or not, and what else. And also it's true, if you've been kind of supplementing for a while and you've been working on certain things and some deficiencies, for example, then you can't really retest, very quickly. Like you need to wait at least a couple of months to see, 3 months or so, to see what else, what has changed. So yeah, there's definitely, and there are also different labs, I find, right? Depending on what you know about you, for example, thyroid, right? Thyroid health, then you know which labs to go to get specific information that you're missing, as opposed to, retesting something that you've already tested again.
So what, if someone's had a blood test and they think, I wonder if I should ask for a new one, like if someone brings a blood test to you, how recent would you prefer it to be?
I say the latest last 6 months, but even that is 3 months ideally. The last 3 months ideally, that would give us a better picture.
Yeah,
but
I
rarely get that. I get more clients that unfortunately have come and I haven't tested in a long while, and so we tend to kind of just write a letter. I write a letter to GP and ask for more based on their symptoms, based on the history, based on the medical history as well, and parental, familial history, and then based on what we get, then we can see, okay, what's missing, what else can we get outside of that, with a private lab.
Yeah, and actually you mentioned family history, and I think that's really important, because if you have a strong family history of something, whether it's heart disease, celiac disease,
thyroid,
diabetes, thyroid, any, and even if you have a family history of lots of different things, it's really important to tell your practitioner, because type 1 diabetes and celiac and thyroid Hashimoto's disease, for example, they're all autoimmune diseases, so they are all linked, but you wouldn't necessarily know that, but we would know what to look for in that case. Or if you've got lots and lots of cancer in the family, then we might decide to, this is not a blood test, but we would then potentially look more at methylation and what's going on with your genetic epigenetics, for example, but and that's sort of moving away then from blood tests. But yeah, I think that's really important as well, to consider family history. And also, if someone's entered the menopause early, I think it's really important, actually, because you don't want to miss that information if this is something that's a potential for you.
Yeah, absolutely. With hormone testing, yes, it's ideally one of the part of the workup anyway, when when it comes to fertility. But yeah, for times I also see, like, we don't want to necessarily wait until a referral to a clinic. We want to do it more proactively with the GP way before, and start looking at those trends, of when it comes to FSH, LH, what's going on, and sometimes even kind of estrogen, right? If it's kind of on the low side, we want to know why may be low, and what else can we do to kind of, because obviously estrogen is quite important for triggering ovulation as well. And so start looking at those trends soon is quite important if we need to act fast as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is all investigations that need to be done. Well, if not before, then as soon as you get told that you need help to try and conceive, or you've been told that you've got unexplained, infertility, or certainly as you're starting to look for a clinic and finding out your options, you definitely need to be doing this concurrently. So, it's not instead of necessarily, but, as you're getting your ducks in a row, this is one of the ducks.
Absolutely.
That needs to be lined up, and like you said, it could take 3 months. It could take, it could take a while because we want to test, to try and fix the underlying issues, retest, make sure, it's working, because it doesn't always work how we hope it's going to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then, it's also connected to supplementing, I guess, because if you think about that as well, like, we tend to work on a 3-month basis when it comes to supplementing, and then we want to retest to see what's going on. And if those supplements that you're taking may have corrected some deficiencies, then you definitely want to kind of adjust there and switch up things a little bit to make sure that you're not going over again, keeping those kind of optimal levels in the Goldilocks kind of range, as opposed to taking the same supplement for a very, very long time, which sometimes doesn't serve you anymore, right? So
and it can throw something else out then, especially if they're minerals. If you're taking one mineral,
absolutely,
they all work in synergy.
Yeah, especially like with iron, as you say, as well, and really wanting to know. And then maybe diet has adjusted in the meantime. Maybe in the meantime also gut absorption has improved because all the work we do together anyway. So there's definitely time for readjusting. That's important to consider as well. And that's why retesting is so important.
Yeah. And what about if someone's had a loss for whatever reason? How long do you think we should wait to run these tests? So
I think that in terms of kind of nutrients, we can still run quite a few tests, like in terms of like full blood count, folate, B12, vitamin D, some markers kind of with pregnancy, depending how far into the pregnancy you are kind of still kind of get out of range, like liver marker sometimes, and cholesterol as well. It depends how far in, but we still, I think there's still kind of a good amount of them that we can still test from a nutrient point of view. And then when it comes to hormones as well, then you probably want to wait at least a couple of cycles to get things back into kind of a normal kind of state again. And then potentially any other markers that we missed out before. But it's so important then, I guess, also at that stage to do test nutrient levels, because we know even the first trimester, obviously there's
much.
Exactly. There's a lot of nutrients utilization, that goes to baby, that's obviously mom can be easily depleted. So and so it's correcting those nutrient deficiencies early on obviously can put you in a good stead when it comes to then the preparation phase afterwards as well. And it's important what to consider if there have been like several losses as well. And
it does become much more important to make sure that you're not depleted, because it does have an impact not only on the baby's health but mum's health, and also risk of postnatal prenatal depression as well.
Absolutely,
with certain nutrients that can be so, because that early conception stage is such a huge need for methylation nutrients, for energy, for everything that you've been storing up, and you just need to make sure that it's not taken out of you more than you need to. Obviously emotionally and physically it's hard anyway, but we just want to make sure that you're supported as much as humanly possible, so that you can be healthy and happy during your next pregnancy.
Absolutely,
And so there's lots of, actually, when you're looking online, kind of, I'm sure people have Googled kind of blood tests online, and there's lots of finger prick tests available as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different types of finger prick tests. So there's the ones that you kind of just blot on a piece of paper. You just have a drop and you sort of put it on it. Vitamin D tests are often like that.
Yeah.
And then there's the ones that look like mini vials that you sort of have to like
fill in.
You're squeezing your own fingers to death to like get enough out. And then, and I've had so many clients actually just faint at home trying to, because it's just, even though it doesn't seem like that much, it's just too much for them to do. But are they useful? Are they a good idea? Is it a waste of money? What do you think?
So I always say that when possible, try to do a blood draw instead of a finger prick test. For many reasons. One of them, first of all, is that we obviously there's less of the hassle with having to do it yourself at home, especially if you're not very comfortable with that type of things. Also, it's going to be done properly. By obviously a phlebotomist, and then third, if there is anything out of range, then it's more likely that your GP will or another doctor will kind of look at it in a more favorable eyes and kind of wanted to retest it and look at it properly. Whereas maybe with a finger prick test, it's not always considered as accurate, or is you may still get a retest if something is out of range. But if it's not out of range, then, and again remembering the reference ranges are quite wide, then you may be having a value that is not necessarily reflective of that particular marker.
Yeah, because I think so I was going to say one of the reasons is because your fingers are on the periphery of your body, so actually you're not necessarily having the exact same circulation of nutrients into your fingers as you would have pumping through your arms.
And I think there's also another thing to consider is how many markers then these blood panels with finger prick tests are trying to catch, right? If it's too many, we often see that either some of them are missed or some of them may not be completely accurate. And then the other thing is really kind of the variability that it may happen when it comes to, as you say, preparation and trying to get that kind of blood out, right? Where you do need to really warm up your hands, you really need to make kind of some movements as well to get circulation going into your fingers, and having be really, really hydrated again is super important. So because there's so much variability, between different people for how they do it in terms of taking their blood from a finger prick, then it can be an extra kind of variable in there that you don't want to, that may kind of give us some skewed results when it comes to blood testing. So I always say if it's a marker or two and they're not necessarily kind of like, for example, vitamin D potentially is not, it's not a major issue like to try and do with a finger prick. Or small markers, B12 or folate, if you want kind of that little kind of fill the gap for certain things, then you can ideally finger prick. It's not an issue. But if it's something important that you're monitoring, like even like your thyroid, TSH, and things like that, then I would definitely go more for a blood draw. And if it's a bigger panel, definitely with a blood draw as well.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I obviously get sent lots of these tests all the time, and I always do them because I just think, why not? I'm going to retest this thing. And the number of times it's been sent back, and I know the importance of actually making sure that it's filled to the line. And then the number of times it comes back and it said, you didn't fill it enough. And I'm like, I know I did, but there's obviously something about this vial thing that I'm supposed to have filled at home that doesn't, because it actually often gets sent back, and then you're thinking, by the time you've had a new test and a new, you're set back in time, aren't you?
Yeah,
even
you
if
might
it's just
as well
an
have
extra 2 or 3
weeks.
Yeah, it's really upsetting because you're thinking, I don't have 3 weeks to waste because that's a cycle.
Yeah, indeed.
It's nearly a whole cycle cycle. So that's another consideration. Is it worth just paying the £25 or whatever to go and get the test, the blood drawn?
Yeah, because now it's so much easier, isn't it? With Superdrug, for example, offer blood draws, or with certain private labs, they already offer different kind of clinics that you can go to depending where you are. And then another thing, like you were saying, if when the finger prick tests, another thing that often can happen is that squeezing the finger actually can ruin the blood cells themselves. So it's another risk of of potential things going wrong. So when possible, blood draw is the option. It's the best option.
Yeah, definitely. To go for. And so blood testing, I think we've established that it's really, really important to test. And, it's a kind of universal language that's spoken between doctors, nutritionists, healthcare practitioners all around the world. And, we can understand even, I've had a number of clients from Germany, or, obviously you work with clients in Italy, or, we can...
Europe sometimes,
we can understand what it means. And you can take a private lab test to your GP and say, listen, I've had this test, can you help me? And they understand it, and that's great. But there are limitations as well, obviously. It's a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Especially with some of the hormones, they can really fluctuate even within a day, let alone day to day. And, there are some limitations as well. And then, but the blood test can inform us what else we might want to look at as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of other tests, we use saliva, we use stool, we might use hair tests. What else do we use?
Vaginal swabs. Dry urine testing, like Dutch testing for hormones. Yeah, because then with obviously blood testing, there's E2, there's estrogen, but there's other estrogens as well in our body. And what happens to that estrogen afterwards in terms of methylation? And you can't get that information from a blood test, unfortunately. So you can know the levels, but you can't know what happens to that estrogen, for example. So you can do dry urine testing, like Dutch testing, or even I find kind of nutrigenomics can be helpful there, to knowing what trends you have from a hormonal point of view. That's quite nice. An addition. And then obviously, as you said, there is then all that extra digging when it comes to for example, finding potential when it comes to immunity, or when it comes to infections, for example. Then we can go into gut testing, stool testing. We can go into vaginal microbiome testing, which obviously it's important for fertility regardless of blood testing anyway. We want to do that regardless anyway.
Definitely. But that, and that's heavily impacted by estrogen levels in your body. And so you sort of, it's good to have all these tests sort of reading them together as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, the more the better.
Yeah.
But but obviously, as I said, starting with a blood test is a really good start anyway.
Yeah. So just as a final question, so someone's going, I haven't got any money, I want to go to the GP, and what should I ask for? So we're looking at full blood count for sure, and that's not a problem generally to get.
No. You can. I can find that you normally can get easily a full blood count. You get a liver profile easily, renal, kidney profile easily. Cholesterol, lipids they would do normally as well. Again, it can give an HbA1c, which is the marker for blood glucose in the last 3 months. That's something that they're normally quite happy to do.
Yeah, really important.
And then, there's sometimes with the liver profile, there's also proteins as well, like things like globulin, albumin. It can also give us an indication of protein absorption, for example. They don't always do the minerals, the calcium, the sodium, potassium, unless you kind of ask them. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then the the iron panels is obviously sometimes just serum iron and ferritin, and sometimes it's just ferritin.
They never do more.
And thyroid, they do just normally just TSH, or if you like a TSH and T4.
Yeah.
And then hormones, it's important to know to ask them to test them on the right days. So for women, for female,
for women.
For like day 3 hormones and then progesterone to be done on a separate time.
Yeah. And we haven't mentioned CRP, but I think this is one that should be included as well, because again, it's...
Yeah, I was thinking about it now as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, obviously the CRP, I just had a client today actually with a very high CRP. But yeah, CRP is a marker for inflammation. Obviously the one that you get from the GP is just a standard CRP. It's not a high sensitivity CRP, which is slightly different, but you can get that more privately. But even that can give us an indication in terms of like, general inflammation and whether that kind of confirms that the patterns we may have seen, maybe like the high ferritin, for example, or the high cholesterol and potential kind of liver markers being a bit off. So that is a good one to keep. And also GP would normally be happy to do that. And if it's really elevated, we know something is definitely going on, and it's obviously something acute most of the time. If it's really high, and to keep an eye on and for sure retest with GP.
So CRP is a marker of it. It's a non-specific marker of inflammation. So it's just saying there's inflammation in your body. We don't know what it is, but it gives us a clue as to what's going on. It's worth saying though that, don't freak out if it's high and you've recently had a cold, for example, because it's normal. That's what the body does. It makes CRP in response to a cold. Also, when we get pregnant, it tends to go up. It's a normal, but inflammation generally is not good for you. So that's why we want to check CRP. And again, the normal range is generally up to 5, isn't it? But we want to see it below 1.
Below 1, yeah.
For somebody who's supposedly well.
Yeah.
So that's something to look out for as well, I think. And if it's ever come up high, then that does need to be retested. Just to make sure it's coming down, even if, you think why it was high. Yeah, so I think that, anyone who's listening is thinking, I haven't had a test, I had 6 months since my last test, or I've not been offered all these things. For sure, go and have a chat with a GP and just say, please can I have these tests as a starting point? Because it's great to have these from the very start when you're working with somebody, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than having to order them when you start.
Yeah, sometimes I also work with, when I start working with clients, even before we've had our first appointment, I try to see what's going on, and potentially if they have never had tests before, we can request them and see what happens. And then we have a much clearer picture on that first appointment going in. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to know more about you and how to get hold of you, and I think do you have a free download as well that we're linking to?
Yeah. So these kind of markers that we have just talked about, I have like a little document with them that I'm really happy to share. So I will be giving it to you, Sandra, to add to the notes, so people can download them and know which markers to ask for. And and then
great.
Hopefully it'll be useful.
Yeah. And if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way to contact you?
So my website, through my website is the best way. My name is Milena Mastroianni, but my website is called rootandleafnutrition.com. And I'm on Instagram with at rootandleaf.nutrition as well, so I'm available there as well. But yeah, normally my website, you go there and you can book a nice kind of chat, discovery call, we call them, or 30 minutes, and we can talk more if you want to.
Yeah, so it's always worth having booking that free chat just to find out if there's anything that Milena feels that you could help, or because I think those discovery calls are really important as well to establish whether actually maybe you don't need to work with us right now. Maybe you need to actually go and see somebody else, or a different professional, or whatever it might be. So those discovery calls are free, non-obligation.
No,
getting to know you, getting to know your practitioner. I
find like people always get kind of a couple of tips from them anyway. They're kind of worthwhile. Just to have a chat and you get at least sometimes get direction of what next to do, what to do next if you're not ready to work with a practitioner yet.
Bit of strategy, yeah, for sure. Yeah, highly recommended. Get booking your chats with Milena, and thank you so much. It's been really useful.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having me, Sandra.
I really enjoyed this chat with Milena, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Please like, save, share, and rate this podcast if you found it useful, as it helps us reach more people. Also, don't forget your 10% discount of tests with Neovos using the code fertility at the checkout. And if you're looking for a fertility specialist to support you, our practitioners can be contacted over at www.fertilitynutritioncenter.org, and they all offer a free strategy call to help you decide on your next steps on your journey. Thank you for listening.